and welcome to the Power Tools for Coalitions webinar series. I'm Sarah Walls, Communications and Program Coordinator at USBC, and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. My co-moderator at this webinar is Miriam Rodriguez, our Coalition Relations Coordinator. The Power Tools series is organized as part of USBC's training, technical assistance, and capacity building support for the network of state, territorial, tribal, and community breastfeeding coalitions across the United States. Just a little background on this series. Access to these webinars is free and open to all breastfeeding coalition leaders, members, breastfeeding advocates, and to anyone involved in forming or leading nonprofit organizations in the breastfeeding field. So if that's someone that you know that isn't on this webinar series, be sure to forward on our information to them. We want to make the biggest possible audience as possible. Webinar and registration details are always posted 1 to 2 weeks before the live session on our public webpage at www.usbreastfeeding.org/powertools. Webinar announcement emails are also sent through the USBC's Coalitions announcement list. If you're not subscribed to this announcement list, we warmly invite you to visit the Coalitions Learning Connection located inside the USBC website, where you can subscribe to this forum to receive key updates and announcements from USBC headquarters. A USBC login is required to join the Learning Connection, and it only takes about 1 minute to create one. As you probably know, we have streamlined access to this series, so you only need to register once to have access to all future sessions. Once you've registered, which you've all done by appearing here today, you'll receive reminders from the GoToWebinar system with your unique link to each session. Slides and handouts for today's session can be found on the public Power Tools webpage, which the link has been chatted out to you. We understand that not everyone can make it to every live session, so we do record all of our webinars. You'll be able to find the recording of today's session on the webpage or in the Coalition's Learning Connection, along with all of our other archived sessions. And here's how to navigate to the public webpage. Simply hover your mouse over the Coalitions tab at the far right and select either the Coalition's Learning Connection, which is the second option in the drop-down menu, or the Power Tools webpage, the fourth option from the bottom. For today's session, all participants are in listen-only mode. We have set aside some time after the presentation to answer any questions, and Jen will pause in the middle of her presentation to take any questions that you might have. And we encourage you to type in your questions during the webinar. Additionally, if you would like to participate by audio during the webinar, please feel free to raise your hand in the webinar system. And here's how you do either of those things. Go to the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right of your screen. If you don't see it right away, it may be minimized. Simply click on the orange arrow and it'll pop back up. To raise your hand, click on the little hand icon, which you should see on the right side of it. Or to submit a question, scroll down below the audio section and you'll see a tab labeled questions. When you click on it, it will open up a box for you to type in. If you have any webinar-related problems, please either chat them into the chat box or send an email to coalitions@usbreastfeeding.org, and one of our staff members will assist you. So that's all of our technical introduction out of the way, which brings me to today's topic: Designing for Equity, Lessons Learned from the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Hackathon and Policy Summit. We heard from some members of the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck team at our National Breastfeeding Coalition's convening and conference in Atlanta in August, and I'm so excited that Jennifer Roberts is here to share more about their work with our webinar audience. She will be discussing the Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Hackathon and Policy Summit that convened at the MIT Media Lab in April of this year for 2 days of dynamic conversation and exercises focused on expanding access to equitable paid leave. The event stressed taking a systems-based lens for change, e.g. hacking technology, but also hacking narratives, policies, and other systematic barriers to breastfeeding. A core principle of the convening was centering equity and elevating the voices of those most often left out of hacking technological problems, particularly parents of color, parents from the LGBTQIA community, and low-wage workers. In this webinar, Jen will be discussing the successes and challenges of designing a space that encouraged equitable design and the lessons learned from the Hackathon and Policy Summit. Jennifer Roberts is our speaker for today. At Make the Breast Pump Not Suck, she is the chair of the advisory board and their Equity and Inclusion League. She's also the founder and CEO of VERST Education Group, an organization dedicated to helping schools, school systems, and other education-facing organizations begin courageous conversations about race and equity. With Make the Breast Pump Not Suck and their Hackathon and Policy Summit, she aids the project in ensuring that race, class, and equity implications are considered and that project outcomes are beneficial to communities that need the most assistance. She serves as the chairwoman for the advisory board and acts as the liaison between the board and leadership team. And it is so great to have her with us this afternoon. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen. And you may be muted.
Thank you guys for having me. Can everybody hear me? Is that good, Sarah? Hopefully it is.
Yes.
Great. I am going to share my screen really quickly so we can get started. Great. So I'm really excited to be on this call today. Thank you all from USBC for asking our team to be here to present. It's very exciting. Anytime we get to talk about this project, I think all of us would say it was a labor of love. And so being able to continue talking about it, especially with folks like you all, is something that's really exciting for all of us. I'm not sure if anyone else from my team was able to join the call today, but if they are, I'm sure they'll jump in at some point. And if you attended the hackathon, I'd love for you to say hi in the chat. So we'd love to hear from you if you were attending. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I will stop halfway through to ask for questions, but of course you're welcome to ask questions throughout in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get those answered for you as well. So I want to spend some time today talking about the hackathon, the framework that we used for the hackathon and the policy summit to make sure that we were centering equity, and then give you some of the lessons that we've learned. And I'll say they're just a few of the lessons because we're still even, a few months later digging through data, getting testimonials back from different folks. So we're still pulling together some of our learnings, but I want to make sure I can share some of the main ones with you. So the breast pump, Make the Breast Pump Not Suck Hackathon, which we started calling a breastfeeding festival, happened at MIT in April. And the intent behind our gathering was to have folks really think about problems that they are seeing in the postpartum space, particularly around breast pumps and around breastfeeding, and not just the technological pieces of this, but the systemic issues, the programmatic advances that we could be making, and making sure that people had the space and the time to really think about innovations that they can make in that area. And so in 2014, MIT hosted the first hackathon, and that hackathon got lots of press and lots of attention, and it was a very successful event. And there are a lot of breast pumps and other things on the market right now that came as a part of that first hackathon that are very successful, but they're also very expensive. And so Catherine and Rebecca and Alexis, who are part of the first hackathon, sat down and really thought about the world that they would want to see based on the things that might have happened in that room, and really thought about ways that we could reinvent the hackathon to really bring in people from the communities that were already doing this work and that deserve to have the time and the space to be able to think with other community leaders to do their best work for the people that need it the most and that they were already working to serve in their communities. So we decided to take the hackathon route again. And so I want to share a little bit about what a hackathon is. So I think we have a poll for that. I'd love to hear how many people know what a hackathon is. How many people know what a hackathon is?
We're about 70% participation. We'll leave it open for probably about 10 more seconds just to bump it up a little bit more. So it looks like we're an overwhelming 62% of our participants are not familiar with hackathons, Jen.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what hackathons are. And then I'll share. I'm sorry, it looks like I went out of presentation mode. Let's go back in there. Well, it's not acting right for me, but hopefully everybody can see this. Okay, we'll just keep going. So the idea behind a hackathon is that it is usually a space often filled with young white male technologists where they spend 48 to 72 hours trying to come up with innovations to solve a problem. They come to the space either on teams already, or they build teams in the space with people who are also interested in solving their particular problem, and they spend tons of time coming up with what might be the best way to solve that problem by creating different prototypes and the like. And usually it is technology focused, usually not systemic or structural issues tackled in those types of hackathons. The presentations that people make to get people to join their team are often one-sided, with the person who had the idea being the person who is the most prominent, and having a polished narrative being something that's important. They're usually ranked cash prizes. Folks usually are generating new projects, and sometimes those things fizzle out when they leave. And then it's usually focused on output and productivity, and not community building. And so even though we believe the hackathon structure is a great way to get folks thinking and problem solving in the space, and especially with MIT being a place where hackathons are pretty common, we did know that there were some things about the traditional hackathon structure that would not work in terms of centering equity the way we knew we wanted to. And so we really started thinking about what a hackathon would need to look like if we wanted it to be one that created the space that we felt community members would feel brave enough to innovate in. And so we wanted to make sure that in our hackathon that participants were from diverse backgrounds, and that not just technology expertise was celebrated, but that all types of expertise were celebrated, that we focused on the systemic and the structural contexts that we use breast pumps in, or that we use other technologies in, because of course we realized that we could give a breast pump to a mom, and if she doesn't have the support and the systemic ability by being able to stay at home after giving birth, or being able to have the support she needs to breastfeed, that the pump really doesn't do as much without the systemic changes. And so we wanted to make sure we focused on those as well, and that people had the opportunity to hack those. We also wanted to encourage folks being able to share responsibility in terms of leadership on their teams. And so the science fair style presentations that we chose to do allowed two-way communication between folks who were looking at their innovation, participants' innovations, and the people on the team being able to share about their participation on that team. We had experiential learning prizes. A lot of times we know that some of the best help that can be given to communities that are working on this is the support and resources and access. And so we had lots of sponsors who wanted to work with communities to really help them expand their vision. And so this allowed us to help people build relationships in ways that could carry on past the hackathon. And we're still hearing reports back from folks about how beneficial some of those relationships have been. We also wanted to make sure that our hackathon set up a place where we could nurture existing efforts, like really celebrate things that were already happening in communities, and give people the space to expand those visions. And then focusing on learning and relationship building, not just between people who already knew each other in the space, but really between different disciplines and different domains. And so that was our goal with how we wanted to set up our hackathon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we got there. So one of the pieces of our work was using a framework called Equity by Design. And the idea behind equity by design is that racism and inequity are products of design. And so if they were designed, then we can also redesign them if we're intentional. And if we use specific strategies to make sure that we illuminate the things that sometimes might be blind spots to us in the process. And so we use this twofold. We not only talked about this and introduced folks to this structure of designing at the hackathon, but as a team, we also used the structures in here to make sure that we held each other accountable to our equity goals, and made sure to really be thinking about how to work with communities and hear from communities about the best way to have this event. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Equity by Design is, just to give you an idea of some of the things we were considering. And then I'll talk about how that worked into the hackathon planning itself. So the idea behind Equity by Design is that it is an additional layer of checks and tools for a traditional design process. So folks who are problem solving and developing technological solutions use processes often called human-centered design, where they ask folks about the things that are important to them, and then those designers go off with that information and design something that they think will be helpful for that community. Well, often what that means is that you have people who have no idea about that community, have never lived in that community or been a part of that community, designing the solutions for that community. And Equity by Design retrofits that particular process to add in layers of checks and tools for people who are designing to ensure that that's not the types of outcomes that come about through innovation. And so it really illuminates some of the racism and inequities that exist in our societies and in ourselves that maybe we wouldn't normally be paying attention to, so that we can really think about the way we're framing solutions and problems. And so we wanted to use this approach as a way to hold us accountable to what we believed could be an event that really centered the folks that we knew needed to be centered in this conversation. And Equity by Design has three main beliefs, and I'll talk a little bit about how each of these played into what we did. So the first belief is that we see, or that historical context matters. And so it was important for us to not only understand the historical context of breastfeeding in the United States, but also to be thinking about the organizations that we were working with, the context in which they were working, the context in which the first hackathon had happened, and what had worked and not worked, and what was really important for the people that we were hoping to serve by doing this project. And so it was important that we not only learn that information ourselves, but that we also went and reached out and talked to people. And then we also had a research component with our project that allowed us to really talk and hear the stories of folks on the ground, moms who were really experiencing various systemic issues to being able to breastfeed their children. And we wanted to make sure we heard those stories, so that not only could it inform our process of designing the event, but that it could inform the processes of anyone who came to participate in our event as they sought to seek out solutions for those problems. The second belief is the idea that of radical inclusion. And so we have to have multiple stories, we have to have multiple truths, and we have to bring those things to the surface. And so we, along the research project, helped to do that, but we also wanted to make sure we created the space within the event itself for people to be able to share their truths and share what solutions would be be best for the people in their communities. And along with that, radical inclusion also means allowing people to be their full selves. And so that's something that we worked on as a leadership team, in thinking about our own biases and our own identities and what that meant for why we do the work we do. And allowing that to create the space for us to bring our full authentic selves to the creation of that event. And then being able to do that within our work together um, allowed us to reach out and ask for help and from our advisory board and other folks to help us make sure that that's the type of environment that we created as well at the event. And then the third belief in equity by design is this idea of process as product. And so really reminding ourselves that equity is not an endpoint. Equity is a process. And so that means that we're going to constantly have starts and stops. We're going to have to make adjustments to what we thought might have been a good way to go. And we can't look to the past to help us figure out what an equitable future would look like. And so reminding ourselves that we did not have to do things the way they had always been done, but instead that we should really think about what an equitable event or equitable society would look like and really aim our goals towards that. And that's a bold approach. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that made it easier to do that in this situation than maybe it would be in others. But it definitely was the grounding for the choices that we made in our design process of the event. And so one of the things when we think about being seen is seeing images of the parents and the moms that we were hoping to serve. And one thing that a lot of people on this call, I'm sure, already know is that finding pictures of parents of color, moms of color, people who don't fit the dominant culture view of a mom or a parent, finding pictures of those people breastfeeding is really difficult. And so one of the things we knew would help create the space that folks needed to be bold and brave in their innovations is to see themselves in the space. And I know personally as a Black woman, when I see myself in the leadership, when I see myself in a space, I'm automatically going to feel more welcome. And so we wanted to make sure that the space that we created wasn't just about saying, hey, come to MIT, this place is great, look at all the things we can give you, but instead say, no, you're welcome here. This is your space. You should use it in the way that's best for you to do your best work. And in order to do that, we knew we needed to have folks then be able to see themselves in the art that was there and in the photographs that were there. So these are some of the photos that were commissioned by the project by Vanessa Simmons, who I'm sure you all are familiar with from the normalized breastfeeding hashtag. And she went around and took photos of folks around the country who volunteered to share their stories and also share their experiences breastfeeding their children. And so these pictures, along with others, were up in an art gallery as a way to create that be seen area, that radical inclusion that I talked about on the first screen. The other thing we wanted to think about in terms of radical inclusion was who was physically in the space. And if you remember from the first slide about the difference between hackathons, these are normally very male, white dominated spaces. And so we knew if we were helping to build coalition and community for people to solve problems in communities for people of color and for immigrants and for low wage workers, then those should be the majority of the people in the room. And so we wanted to make sure that we not only thought about where people were coming from in terms of in the country, what places they were coming from, but we also wanted to think about what the racial makeup of the room was. And we set a goal to make sure that there were 70% people of color in the room. And we knew that meant that we couldn't just put an all call out for recruitment, that we really needed to be targeted and talk to our community members and really think about how to get the right people in the room to make sure that innovation was able to happen. And we also wanted to think about domain expertise. And so we wanted to make sure that there weren't just technologists and engineers in the room, though they are helpful to be in the space. We wanted to make sure there were enough students and young people who could really bring their fresh perspectives to the work and who could also be advocates on their college campuses or with other people to really continue this conversation. We wanted to make sure that educators and academics from HBCUs and other institutions were in the place to give their expertise about what this looked like in the academic arena. We wanted to make sure there were advocate moms and parents who were able to be there, health practitioners as well, people from the arts community. We wanted to make sure we were bringing folks from all different sectors who had a passion about this issue. And whether they were a parent or not, or whether they even had ever known anybody personally that had breastfed, we wanted to make sure that they knew that if they were passionate about this issue, there was a space for them to help communities that wanted that if they were willing to let those communities lead. And so this was something that was very important to us, and we set specific goals around those things to make sure that we were hitting those and setting our targets appropriately. The other piece of this project that I think really brought in the ideas behind Equity by Design were our community innovation teams. And so I would say we were very lucky to be able to work with 4 different existing organizations from around the country, from Boston, Tupelo, Mississippi, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Detroit, Michigan. And if any of you guys are on the call, give us a shout out in the chat. And this program brought in these folks from their organizations who were already doing wonderful things in their community. And we were able to work with them over the course of 6 months to really think about designing, think about their own projects, give them access to some of the people and mentors and technology at MIT, and give them really some time with support and guidance from our team and others to really develop an idea that they thought would be the best way to solve a issue in their community. And so the Massachusetts team is opening up the Neighborhood Birth Center, which will be the first freestanding birth center with a liberatory framework. We have Northeast Mississippi Birthing Project that's working on a social media and platform, and also some connectivity between different generations of people in their community to really encourage breastfeeding. You know, our friends from Indigenous Women Rising, we're working on transforming Native attire to be breastfeeding friendly. And then our friends from Harambe Care, we're working on an app or a program that will help moms really advocate for themselves with their healthcare professionals around breastfeeding. And so these were all projects that folks were thinking about already, and being a part of this project really helped them have dedicated space to think, because I'm sure all of you know in our busy lives it's hard to get that time. And so it was really important to us that folks had some dedicated time and support to think about those things, and could really serve as leaders in the hackathon space when they came in April. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that folks knew that what we thought would help in this space was for them to just be the leaders. And we wanted to just leave and create the space that would allow community members to feel like they had autonomy to be their authentic selves, create the solutions that were best for them, really put their heads together with people maybe they wouldn't normally get a chance to be with, and think about the best way to move breastfeeding equity forward. And on the policy side of our program, similar things were happening. After hearing from various folks from the policy world, we wanted to make sure we brought in not just folks who are on the Hill, or not just folks who are in big legislative organizations, but people who were grassroots as well from all of the communities that we were hoping to serve. And they had an opportunity to also hack, if you will, policy, and think about the ways that they would want to change policy in order to move forward in the paid family leave conversation. And so this was something that the process that we took as a team to really think about our own biases and our own selves, to really set explicit goals for how equity would show up in the space, to really build relationships and make sure that we were letting communities lead was how we wanted to structure this event. And we've heard from lots of folks so far that even though, there are tons of things that we're thinking about, we already want to do differently. We've heard from so many people about how the space really made them feel comfortable, like that babies really were welcome, that people felt like they saw themselves in the space. They really felt like they were welcome in a space that maybe they would not have normally thought about being welcomed or being a part of. And so that was something that was really important to us. And it was great for us to hear people say just that. And so I want to stop here before I get into some of the lessons and see if there are any questions from folks.
It doesn't look like we have any right now, but if you have any questions for Jen, feel free to put them into your questions box, or if you want to raise your hand now, we can also come and unmute you. Okay, it looks like we have one, Jen. One that says, "This is all really great information, but a lot to consider. How can organization sort of get started on like the very beginning of using equity by design as a tool?"
Yeah, I think one of the things that that I think is helpful for getting started is I did share the article for folks who have not read the article that this framework came from with the team, so you'll be able to get a link to that if you haven't already. But I think one of the best places to start is looking at the design principles, and I'm going to see if I can bring them up. And in particular, there are two in particular that I think are good places to start. And one of those is this idea of designing at the margins, and how intentional we have to be about thinking about who's on the margins of whatever situation or problem we're trying to solve. And in our case, in this society, we know that people of color are on the margins, our LGBTQIA folks are on the margins, low wage workers are on the margins. And so we really want to be thinking about how we solve our problems by thinking about those folks. And if they're not at the table, if we're not talking to them, if we're not in relationship or community with folks who are in that community, then we should be asking ourselves those questions. And that's one place to start. And then I also think this idea of starting with yourself. I think the reason why we were able to do the work that we were and be successful in some of this is because we were willing to look inward first. And it can be really easy to think that that's not necessary, especially if you're a person, I guess, who would consider themselves woke, or you're really, you're into. I know about implicit biases, but even in that, we all are still making mistakes, and so it is important for us to really constantly consider our blind spots. And we messed up a lot. And having really good trusted advisors who were willing to call us out on that. And in particular for the white members of the team, they did even additional work just as white people with the help of one of our community innovation team folks to really help them think about their whiteness and like what that meant being a part of the breastfeeding community and working towards equity for people who did not look like them. And so I think those things are so important to do, and they're things that all of us can do, just getting our knowledge up about our own identities and about what it's like to be on the margins in our society, and really thinking about that and learning about that, so that when we start designing or start answering questions or start wanting to solve a problem in our organization, we'll be more likely to ask a question about who isn't there or who is there, or who's getting to speak and who isn't getting to speak. So to me, those are two places I think that we all can start.
Yeah, I like that a lot. We have just like a couple like very positive, actually a lot of very positive responses to the focus on creating imagery with diverse populations, which I definitely agree with. It's very true that it can be hard to find photos of breastfeeding families of color. And then another question is just like more of a logistical one I think about the community teams. Was there like financial support provided for folks who were traveling to the
Yes. So for our community innovation teams, they were funded for travel when they met with us, and also received funding for to travel to the event as well. And then, yes, we had quite a bit of funding for folks that we called our breastfeeding innovation fellows, which were people who really helped to round out the diversity of the space and really had compelling stories about the way that they were already contributing to the breastfeeding world. And we wanted to make sure that they were supported. And because we also knew that, unfortunately, when we're thinking about the way organizations that support people of color or are run by people of color are funded, they often aren't funded in ways that allow them to send lots of folks to an event like this. So we did make sure that our budget allowed for us to pay for as many people as we could. It definitely was not enough. But I will say that is one of the benefits of that was one of the benefits of our funding structure, which I know is not the reality for a lot of folks. And so I do want to be clear that there was some privilege in here for us, that we had significant funding and that we were able to go back and make the case to our funders about why we should fund folks to come to this. And we were given we're given the support to do that. And so I do think that makes something like this easier to do. And so I don't want to slight that. But there definitely was funding. And I think if we were to do this again, we're already thinking about how we would get more, because we know that definitely contributed to why we were able to have so many people in the space that we did.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. I think we have one more, and then we can move on to the second half.
Okay.
So this is about the phrase "design at the margins," and the asking sounds like design with the margins. Do you actively recruit and engage a diverse audience to contribute to the design throughout the process?
Yes, and I actually think that is a better way to say it, is design with the margins. And really, I would say even that with has some caveats, in that the folks on the margins should be the leaders of that, and they should be getting support from those of us that can give that support. And so you should be throughout the process engaging folks from the community. I know that we had so many folks in the community that helped us and engaged with us, and I'll show a little bit of talk more about that when I get into the lessons learned. But what I like to say to folks is that we want to really avoid this whole idea of like fake feedback, or where we go in, we already have our idea, but then we go into the community and say, hey, we'd like to hear what you want, and we steer them into the direction we want to go. This process is really saying, like, no, you might have to step back, and maybe what you thought was good might actually not be the right decision. And that in order to reach equity, we'll have to give up some of that power that maybe some of us have, and say, actually, I am going to make sure I can support you to do what's best for your own community. And so that can be sometimes difficult for folks to do, but that would be the process, is really making sure you're including folks throughout, and that they're getting the opportunity to lead in the solutions for themselves.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I think that's all the questions we have at this juncture.
Okay, I will keep going. So I want to give a little bit of information about some of the outcomes and lessons learned. And so one of our lessons learned, and I would say we knew this, but we really the value of this really became even more apparent once folks started showing up in the space, was how much relationships matter, and that they really are the foundation for doing this work well, whether you're doing a hackathon or something else. If you want to infuse equity into anything that you're doing, the relationships with the community that you're serving, with stakeholders, all of those things are important. And that doesn't just mean building it for your own sake, but really listening to each other, and really thinking about what it will mean to be critical friends of each other and hear feedback that will allow you to adjust course and change as necessary. And so we wanted to make sure we created a space at the hackathon where people felt like they were building relationships as well because we know how important they are. And so this is one of the spaces we had at the hackathon where people could kind of post their pictures and really share some of the some of what they were experiencing. And this is just a partial list of the different people and organizations we met with. And some of these people we met with multiple times, more than once. Sometimes we might have had a quick conversation with them and then, saw them again at the hackathon or worked in very close proximity with them for the hackathon. But it was really important for us to just hear from a lot of people and get opinions from people, and particularly from people who worked in and with the communities that this event was designed for. And so that's one of the things I think I just can't, I stress it in the work that I do with other organizations. And, we stress it here that the relationships really are what made this a success. And you can see a few other pictures here as well. And the second one is a lesson that we really got from one of our advisory board members, Kimberly Seals Allers, that the answers are in the community. No matter what the questions are, the answers are in the community. And so it was really important that we continue to remind ourselves that we were just creating a space for people to do their own problem solving, and that the communities already knew what they needed best, and they just needed the support and the time to be able to innovate and create. And we know that that doesn't mean they left with everything perfect, or even that they solved every ill in society. But we know that if we really want to solve the things that the issues that we're seeing, not just in the breastfeeding community, but in our society at large, if we really want to move towards equity, then we really have to start leaning towards the community and letting them solve their own problems. Here's some additional pictures of how folks were coming together to work. And then I think the third one is kind of broad, but color outside of the lines. And what we really mean by that is that idea of it doesn't have to look the way it's always looked. It's okay to, even though it might be scary or difficult, to back up and start over. And we had quite a few moments where we would go back to the folks that we were in relationship with and talk to them about where we had gone with ideas that they had suggested so far, and ask them if they thought we were on the same path. And there were many times when they were like, no, like this is not it. Like, and sometimes we were far into things and we had to turn around and say like, nope, then let's stop. Let's not be so urgent about everything and really think about what's best for the folks that we're trying to serve. And so we have some of the press that we got here as well. And a funny story, one of the press articles we got had a wonderful story about the hackathon, and one of our mothers that was a part of the research project. And when they posted our article, it was posted with the picture of a white mom and a white baby, even though the story was about a black mom and a black baby. And so we really had to kind of go to bat, and we went back and forth about whether it was worth it. But really, because we knew imagery was so important, and we fought so hard to really talk about how important it was for moms of color to see themselves in the media doing breastfeeding their children, hearing their stories. We had to kind of explain that and get that picture changed. And so that isn't something I think any of us would have been bold enough to do when we first started this project. But I think that, as you learn more and you are more aligned to what your vision and your goals are around equity, it becomes easier with the support of your team and people you've built relationships with to really work hard to see society look different, even if that means putting yourself a little bit at risk. And so we often would talk about who could risk more so that we could color outside of the lines and do a little bit more than maybe we were able to do the first time around. And so that's something we suggest to folks, as much as you can, as much as what's in your locus of control, really think outside the box and think about what equity really could look like, and not rely on what maybe has been done in the past or what feels comfortable. And then finally, obviously, we'd love for you to stay in touch. We have changed our email. So if you had our email before, we done a little bit of switching things around. So our new email is on this slide, organizers at maketheBreastPumpNotSuck.com. And we'd love to hear from you. And especially if you could possibly, because I think we have one last poll at the end while people are thinking of questions they might want to ask. And this poll is about whether you might be interested in hosting your own hackathon. So I'm going to let that poll go up in here if anybody's interested in that. And if you say yes to that, or even tell me more, we'd love to hear from you. So I'll let that poll happen.
Okay, so we're at 40, almost 50%. If we can have more results, maybe give it another couple of seconds. If anybody else wants to participate, just giving it maybe 15 more seconds. Okay.
Awesome. So I don't know if we probably can't tell from the polls. I think the polls are anonymous, but if you're interested, we'd love to have you sign up on our website for our newsletter, and then also shoot us an email if you're interested in hearing more. We are thinking about the next phase of this work right now, and really thinking about how we help folks create environments like this to solve their problems. And so the possibility of small hackathons is something that has been thrown out. And so we'd love to hear from you if that's something you'd be interested in hearing more about. And then, of course, if you're interested in attending anything that we do, signing up or on our website or emailing us to make sure you get on a list so you can hear what's happening next will be great. And then we do have a pretty robust Facebook group as well. Make the Breast Pump Not Suck is what you can search for. If you'd like to keep up with other people who have been to the event and are problem solving and hacking other things. So please do that if we can be of assistance or tell you more about what we're doing next. And I guess we're opening up for additional questions now if folks have more questions or comments or anything they'd like to add to the conversation.
Yes, if you have any questions or even just any comments about hackathon structure or what Jen's presented on, feel free to chat them or raise your hand. Or if you were at the hackathon and want to share about your experience, feel free to raise your hand as well and we'll unmute you. So we do have a couple questions.
Okay.
So one, which is actually one of my questions too, is so how did you become involved with the work of the hackathon, coming like from an education background into the organization?
Yeah, so I do race and equity training and work. Some and have done education work with educational hackathons and things like that in my work at Adverse Education Group. And so one of the folks that was already on the leadership team, Kate, when they decided they'd like to really have an equity expert come in and help them with this work, approached me really to ask if I knew someone in the breastfeeding space that did this work. And so we just talked about my philosophy behind what equity looks like to me. And I told her my own personal story. I have a blog on our website, it will be up on our website soon, that talks a little bit more detail about this, but my personal birth experience and pregnancy journey was pretty difficult. And a lot of it had to do with racial bias and, not living in a predominantly Black neighborhood and not have access to a hospital that could give me the care I wanted, but still having the privilege of having really good insurance and the ability to switch doctors and all of these things that essentially saved my daughter's life. And then having a pretty difficult delivery that then made breastfeeding very hard for me, but really championing it. Breastfeeding my daughter for 13 months, really like being a support to my friends, like this became a passion of mine, even, for the last 6 years. And so being able to marry what my professional life was and a personal passion just felt like the perfect project. And so it was really important that we all were able to have a great relationship. And I just clicked with the team so well. And I knew that this was such important work. So that's really how I got on board. And I think that what's been the best thing for me being a part of this project is really helping folks on the education side of things see the connection between what happens before and right after birth and what happens with a mom or a parent when that child is born and what that means for a child when they become a student. And I think that the more we help educators understand that, the more we help legislators understand that, like, it is just so important for us to understand all the ways that all the systems conspire to keep folks marginalized. And so it was important for me, even though I wasn't officially in the breastfeeding community, bringing in that expertise was important to me too. And so that's how I got on board.
That's very cool. It's very cool when folks sort of come into this field having like walked through a different path, but like it all like unfolds back to the same place. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about some of the outcomes or some of the projects that came out of Hackathon?
Sure. So we gave away about 10 prizes, and I think I sent a link to the website, and I want to believe the winners. We have some of the winners posted there, but I'll talk about some of the things that stood out or folks that are moving forward that we know of anyway. Our team from New Orleans, from the New Orleans Breastfeeding Center, they created Infant Ready, which folks who came to the conference in Atlanta saw the poster presentation. That is something that they had been thinking about, but really were able to develop more at the hackathon, and they were one of our winners. They've since raised money to be able to get that prototype out on the market and really partnerships with different folks in New Orleans. And so that's been a huge success story. We had folks from various teams come to DC to meet with their legislators and talk to their legislators about some of the things that they created at the hackathon and some of the things they wanted their legislators to know about in terms of advocating for breastfeeding. And that was a really successful offshoot of the hackathon that came about. We have one of our winners in Mississippi, Chalessa Presley, has gotten the university in the area to talk about putting her Mama Village Co-op as a part of their 10-year plan to be a part of the university work there, which is huge. And I mean, we're constantly getting in more stories from folks. Breast Powered, the group Breast Powered, I'm sure a lot of you heard about their photo shoot that was done by Lakeisha Cohill, and that was, that group came together at the hackathon, and now they are moving forward with some of their work. So it really has been interesting seeing the synergies that were created there, and I'm probably forgetting lots of other success stories, but we're going to try to be posting those as we can, not just so folks can just know what's happening, but so we can continue to support these folks as they are developing their ideas. So that's just a few of the success stories.
That is super cool. Another question we have are just what are some future plans of either Make the Breast Pump Not Suck or the hackathon? I think you had mentioned taking it with an advocacy plan, I think is what this question is referring to.
Yeah, we're really talking about that and trying to figure that out. But one of the things we just keep hearing from people is that the environment that was created at the hackathon was one that they would want to create again. And so we're really thinking about how do we support people who might want to do this with their own organizations, or, reproduce, mini versions of this for something else that they're doing. How do we give support for folks to do that and bring this idea of designing for equity and this idea of problem solving through a hackathon type structure to a broader audience. We're thinking about how we gather folks together just for more development, professional development, and time to really work together with other community organizations. And so really thinking about what that looks like. And then obviously we're always thinking about, on the policy side of things, how do we continue to connect people to ways they can be advocates. And I know the Hill visit that we did was really successful. And so we've thought about what it would look like to continue to help people be in contact with their legislators and really think systemically about how we solve problems that might be standing in the way of them actually being able to be successful with their innovation. So like, how do we help people learn all the parts of the process so they can be involved in that? And so it really is still a work in progress. We're still trying to figure things out. If you have ideas or you have ways that you, would like to see us in the space, we'd also love to hear that. If you want to email us, we love feedback and suggestions from folks. So, but that's some of the things we've thrown out so far as we're trying to figure out what the next phase looks like. And then obviously we'll probably have another hackathon in the next 2 years or so. So maybe 2020-ish, we'll be doing another one.
Nice. What was there any sort of virtual engagement for the hackathon? Did you have any sort of like social media work or any like live streaming of it?
Yep, we live streamed our keynote that Kimberly Seals Allers did. We also live streamed various parts throughout the hackathon. The award ceremony was live streamed. All of those things are actually on the MIT Media Lab page because they were one of our sponsors, and so most of the stuff is there. I think we probably have posted some of those things in our Facebook group as well. So if you join that, you'll be able to see that. We also have on Twitter our hashtag breastfeeding innovation, and our Twitter handle is BF Innovation, where we most of the things from the hackathon were tweeted out as well there. And so we've been a little bit silent, like stepping back and, doing a lot of review of our data and figuring out what's the next steps and everything. So we've been a little quiet on there, but that is the best place, social media wise, to see what happened, and then also to see what's coming next. And then we have a Medium account, which will eventually be merged over onto our Facebook page that has blog entries. That's where the winners are posted, and some information about how we did the judging criteria. And I think that's a great way of seeing how what you think might be the best way to do something sometimes changes when you want to be the most equitable for people. So that's a blog that I know is on that post. And so that you can reach that through our website. To read a little bit more about some of the things that happened at the hackathon and some of the winners. There's also a policy summit summary on that Medium blog as well. So if you want a little bit more details about some of the policy pieces and what that looked like in more detail, that's also available.
Thank you. It looks like we have a couple of folks who have given their emails and that would be interested in participating or potentially hosting future hackathons. So we'll definitely connect you together, which is super exciting. Besides that, I think we're out of questions. So unless there are any last one or any last words from Jen, I think that we're ready to wrap up. But thank you so much. It is so exciting I am like personally just like very into the work that y'all are doing. So it's been really cool to just like hear this presentation and learn more about all of the hard work that went into making the event what it was. Is really, really cool to hear about.
Thank you so much. We couldn't have did it without all the folks that helped us. So I can't say thank you enough to all of those folks that were on that list, and our community innovation teams even still are being so supportive. So, and you guys have been the same. So thank you all for attending. Thank you guys for having us. And we love to hear from you. So don't be strangers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.